Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be listening. Kevin Egan here with Paul Maguire.
Hello, Kevin.
Hey, Paul, here for another professional development podcast. So welcome, everybody.
We're going to be doing something different today, Kevin. I'm going to be interviewing you.
Fantastic.
Our topic today is public speaking.
Good.
What we're aiming to achieve today is that we're wanting our listeners to learn a bit about how you go about public speaking, how you can develop your skills and become a good public speaker. So that's what today's topic is, and how about we kick it off?
Fantastic, Paul. Thanks for the introduction. Folks, in terms of introduction, some of my background in relation to public speaking, running corporate training, and also business retreats and workshops. I have been public speaking for around 30 years now, and the various environments I've found myself in terms of public speaking, I've been speaking from everybody from long-term unemployed people through to functional staff, through to middle management, senior management, in all sorts of different, whether that's a conference, whether it's an in-house workshop, and also service clubs and groups where they run functions for their associations, etc. So audiences that span from 2 up to 2,000.
Okay, well, that's interesting. So what inspired you initially to become a public speaker?
Well, good question. I think the general challenge of it, like most of us, extremely nervous and extremely uncomfortable when getting in front of an audience. Now, the psychology is quite strange here because, like most of us, we can carry on a conversation quite relaxed and quite at ease, but soon as that notion is you've got to stand in front of a group and speak, what happens? We start getting nervous, the solar plexus start to tighten, the heart rate increases, and we feel extremely uncomfortable.
Okay, all right. Well, look, I think we've all been through that, Kevin, so hopefully we can work our way through some good tips as we go. So let's kick it off. And look, the first question that I thought I'd ask you today is, well, tell us about the introduction phase of the presentation.
Yeah.
Right at the beginning.
Yeah. The introduction phase is not to be confused with the word introduction. It's important in the sense of understanding what's happening at the event, such as, is there somebody going to introduce you? There could be an MC ready to introduce you to the audience so you can come on and start to speak. Now, if not, you might have to give the audience yourself a bit of background and history on yourself. Also, the other considerations with the introduction phase is the time you have allotted to speak. I'm sure a lot of you that are listening have been to events where there'll be a schedule of speakers and workshops, and invariably they go over time. And people towards the middle of the day and towards the end of the day, what happens? Their 40-minute presentation gets cut down to 20 minutes. So in terms of the introduction phase and considering all those things, need to be mindful that this could happen to you if you're speaking at such an event. And thus, and I'll cover that a little bit later on.
All right. Well,
today.
Sorry to interrupt you. I was going to say that you mentioned earlier about nervousness. Have you got any tips about how a person, as they introduce themselves, stand up at the podium or wherever, how can a person overcome nervousness when speaking in front of an audience?
Okay. I think one of the important things to consider when it comes to nerves is nerves are natural, and in a public speaking environment, nerves are good. Now, I know that sounds a bit odd. Now, all you have to do is tune into your favourite sporting event and look at these athletes prior to going on stage, if you will, or prior to going on the ground, and you'll see themselves cycling themselves up. And they're nervous, but they've got a lot of nervous energy and they're going to run it out. Somewhat similar to public speaking. So as an athlete, they do a tremendous amount of training, do a tremendous amount of skills development. And as a public speaker, we need to learn from that and do the same sort of things. And I'm going to probably repeat it a few times, Paul, but nothing can substitute the practice of your presentation.
Okay, all right. Well, look, that's interesting because I don't want to focus on the negatives, but You've probably started to talk about what is my next question, which was about the common mistakes that speakers make and how they can avoid them.
Yeah, that's always a interesting topic in the workshops I conduct, the mistakes. And we could speak on some time about the mistakes. And again, I don't want to be negative, but it's important to recognise the mental traps that we go through in preparation. A couple of the key traps that we fall into. Let's assume that you've got a 30-minute presentation and here you are, you're sitting down with a pen and your paper or your computer trying to map out a bit of a plan for your presentation. And you're thinking in the back of your mind, 30 minutes, is that going to be enough? Well, I better put in a bit more. And invariably, you end up with 60, 90 minutes of content to squeeze into 30 minutes. So that is one of the traps that people fall into. Another trap that people tend to fall into is death by PowerPoint. And that's where people will type up their content on into PowerPoint and display it in front of the audience. And by thinking they're doing these visual aids, they think they're doing a good job in terms of the presentation. And this is a trap because it really does remove you as the person, the credibility, the knowledge that you have, the skills that you have. It removes that element. And people, all they do is look at the PowerPoint slides and go to sleep.
Yeah, I think we've all been there, Kevin.
Yeah,
and that's
have.
a very good point.
Yeah, and on that notion of PowerPoint is whatever you do put on visual aids, whether it's a PowerPoint or something else, ensure that people in the auditorium and the theatre can see what you do. I'd suggest 2 or 3 words. Now get this, 2 or 3 words on each slide.
Yeah.
I know you're picking yourself up, but yes. So
Yeah,
people can
okay.
see.
Look, let's get into, I suppose, there's a number of questions about under this particular heading, I suppose, and that is that the techniques that you suggest can be used to improve the delivery and the clarity of a speech, in particular, in order to engage and or connect with your audience effectively. And maybe you can also, in answering that, talk a bit about body language.
Okay, good. Yeah, a number of things there in terms of improving your technique, engaging with the audience and your non-verbals, your body language, as you say, all paramount for you to come across as credible and for you to be able to influence your audience. A couple of things I've observed with a lot of speakers over many years is they might try to tell a joke. And telling jokes is fine if you're good at it. Not all of us are good at telling jokes. I would suggest, rather than trying to be funny by telling jokes, is just work to have fun. Notice that subtle difference. The other thing I'd like to mention in terms of engaging the audience is use the word we as much as you can in engaging your discussion with everybody in the audience. As we all recognise, winter in Tasmania can be cold. Rather than saying something such as, I'm going to tell you that winter in Tasmania is cold, so that notion of including the royal we, use the word you as much as you can during your presentation. This helps engage the audience. And also avoid things, sorry, it sounds obvious, but try not to be condescending or patronising to your audience, and recognise that they've got life experience, they've got work, professional experience, so empathise with that background of your audience. And in talking about the notion of your audience, one of the key things that will make you a successful communicator and public speaker is having a good knowledge of your audience. In other words, what's the demographic? Their age, their sex.
Yeah, you're reading my mind, Kevin. That was going to be my question, about doing a bit of research and understanding who you're talking to.
Absolutely. And this will pay, in a non-verbal sense, if you will, a great deal of respect to the audience that you've done your homework and you understand the industry where they work or the profession they work in. So this also can be a terrific technique.
Okay.
You mentioned about non-verbals and body language.
Yeah.
Now, think about the event. If you are a senior manager and you're delivering a presentation to local industry, or politicians. Important, your body language in terms of your clothing, so a suit might be appropriate with a tie, etc. And hand movements, it's difficult through a audio podcast to do the non-verbal gestures, but do your best to keep an open body language, open palms, avoid the cross arms, and provide plenty of eye contact.
Okay.
Modulation in your voice and the volume. And these are some of the non-verbal, if you will, that will help engage your audience from a body language point of view. And
Sorry, I was going to say, Kevin, my experience, for example, and I'd be interested in your comments on this, is that with the body language, your style, and so forth, even the telling the jokes. I know you and I are great comedians, Kevin, and most people can't carry it. So your advice about making it at least a little bit fun, but watch your jokes is a good one. But the role of preparation and rehearsal, certainly in my experience, is that you can learn a lot about what you do and your body movement and the way that you naturally, often subconsciously or unconsciously, don't know what you're doing. So taping yourself or rehearsing or getting feedback, I always found that really important to improve the way in which I deliver a public speech. Do you agree with that?
I certainly do, Paul. In saying that, you go to that effort where you actually record yourself during your rehearsals and practices is a great testament to your professionalism. And it is one of the takeaway points today is to do that rehearsal in front of a camera. If the camera's problematic, at least audio record yourself so you can listen back and record. And I touched on it before about timings. When you do go through these rehearsals, you'll get a really fine-tuned idea in terms of how long it's going to take. So in your initial preparation, you might have put together 90 minutes of content for a 30-minute presentation. And this will all be very clear when you're doing your rehearsals and so forth. You mentioned before about your professionalism and being clear about your message, if you will. Now, there's a technique, it's been around for many years, and it's a 3-phase technique. It's the tell the audience what you're going to tell them, you tell them, and then you tell the audience what you've told them. Let me just expand on that a bit. So the 3 phases are tell the audience what you're going to tell them. So that's essentially your introduction comments. That might include a bit of background on you, your credibility, why you're there speaking to the particular audience, and also the key points that you're going to talk about in your presentation. So that's the tell them what you're going to tell them bit. Next, we get on to the body of the presentation, the main structure of the presentation, which is the tell them part of the 3-step process. And that's where you get into all your nitty-gritty of your content. There might be some examples, stories, there might be some data, you might need to share some budget records or business performance results, etc., whatever it is. But that will take up the body of your presentation. And as you get to the end, you tell your audience what you've told them in terms of a summary. So you summarise what you've talked about, the main points that you've covered.
Okay. Look, that's a great point, Kevin. And can I, maybe if I can just distill it for the listeners, would I be right in saying then that the 3 rules are tell them what you are going to tell them, 2, then you tell them what you said you were going to tell them, and then thirdly, tell them what you just said to them, so that they walk away understanding what you just told them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know it seems frivolous and humorous.
No, it makes sense to me.
But it's a really good way for you to wrap up a neat presentation. I draw from the example of a 30-minute talk.
Yeah.
It's a very, very effective way to do it. You'll come across extremely professional and well prepared.
And just to, I suppose, finish the discussion around the style and so forth. Again, a 90-minute presentation being delivered within 30 minutes, inevitably does it not result in a speaker